Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm CheeseSlice, and I'm here today to kick off the show today at Left on Left. Today, our guest is Garland Nixon. He's going to be talking about his analysis from COVID and some more stuff. And hosting the show today for WBAI Radio, where, as you know, if you've been watching this a lot, we record an hour episode that we will cut up and put on the radio. But you get to watch us live. So right now, let me bring on Gloria and Jayme. Hello, Gloria, and
hey,
hello, Jayme. And let's go ahead and introduce our guest, Garland Nixon. There we go.
Hello.
Hi, Garland.
Hey,
Good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I'm going to hand off to Gloria. So take it away, and I'll step out of here.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Left on Left, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep from crying. I'm Gloria Guillot, a former administrator in New York City government, an investigative journalist, vice chair at WBAI Radio, and a co-founder of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, a group so left it's right on. I'm joined here today by a resident expert, Jayme Kuzmarov. Jayme is a professor at Tulsa Community College, a historian, investigative journalist, and managing editor of Covert Action Magazine, an online magazine that focuses on CIA and deep state activity. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. The content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or medical advice. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and form their own opinions. We are joined here today by Garland Nixon, veteran talk show host, radio newscaster, and he's written a very interesting article with great links called On COVID Origins, Fort Detrick, and the Mysterious Vaping Disease. And you could find this on his Substack. It's dated December 2nd, 2024. Before we get into that with Garland, I'm going to read a little bit about it from an article I had written in 2020. It was in April of 2020. And the name of the article is Invisible Enemy, Imperial Fascism 2020, not COVID-19. And here we go. What could possibly be a better way to usher in a racist New World Order that's hell-bent on population control than an invisible enemy that gets nearly everyone to gladly jail themselves, fear physical contact with their family, friends, and neighbors, and that disproportionately kills the impoverished and African Americans. What could possibly be a better way to bail out Wall Street's failing repurchasing market, increase surveillance on a more granular level, and mandate an experimental global vaccination program that's eagerly awaited, even though it's spearheaded by Bill Gates, the second richest man in the world, whose major concern is ending overpopulation in predominantly non-white populations? What could possibly provide wide enough cover to desensitize all to the massive troop buildup in Europe that encircles Russia and the deployment of world warships that threaten Venezuela, Iran, and China with invasion, and that ratchets up its criminal economic sanctions against the most vulnerable people in these respective countries and 36 others under the hypocritical ruse that these measures are really to protect them? What could possibly be a more effective way to accomplish repatriation, seal borders, discourage protest, and position the United States into perfect alignment for World War III? If you've correctly answered imperial fascism 2020, you've won, they've lost, and the resistance takes a quantum leap forward. At minimum, one could convincingly argue that the arrival of COVID-19 is fortuitous for certain economic sectors within the United States. For even if COVID-19 is not perceived as a U.S. bioweapon, Washington is undeniably its pimp. Please bring us up to speed, Garland. Thank you.
Well, and also add this about my history, and that is I'm a retired law enforcement officer. I retired holding the rank of major. I was an investigator. I taught investigators and the investigation also on a college level, and I was the commander of the investigations division. So would be considered an expert witness in a court as an investigator. So I started looking into the COVID origins, and I will give you about a 3-minute version of what I found, and I will make it very, very simple. Over about a 16-week period, what we're being told now is, okay, it came from Wuhan, and it really is came from a lab. Let me give you something. Just prior to COVID, that happened over a 16-week period. Maybe only take 2 minutes. July 2019. Here's from the Frederick News Post. Near where I live in Maryland, it is where Fort Detrick is, where they work on all of those nasty germs, including COVID, right? First, July, Fort Detrick lab shut down after failed safety inspection. All research halted indefinitely. So in the middle of July, actually in June, all of a sudden, Fort Detrick shuts down. Research, everything stopped, everything shut down. And everybody's like, well, why is Fort Detrick shut down? No answers there. That's the first data point. Let me give you the second data point. A few weeks later, cause of respiratory illness still unknown after dozens sickened at Virginia retirement community. Within 1 to 2 weeks after let me read this. Fairfax County officials have said they don't yet have a cause of the respiratory illness that sickened more than 60 residents at a Northern Virginia senior living home, right? You can look it up. 3 people also died. By the time this ended, it hit 2, maybe an hour's drive from Fort Detrick. 2 retirement homes suddenly come with this mysterious respiratory illness, sweeps through, kills a whole bunch of people. That's pretty much it now, okay? That's 2 weeks later. Let's go next. Within 2 more.
And that's in summer too.
Now, within 2 more weeks, mysterious lung illness leaked to vaping. Health officials investigate nearly 100 cases. So let's go here. Number 1, Fort Detrick shuts down and they handle coronavirus and all kinds of things like that. And within 2 weeks, retirement homes start coming down with some mysterious illness that's killing people. Within 2 more weeks, a mysterious vaping illness shows up in August, and people are dying of it, and it's popping up. And if you research this mysterious vaping illness, what you will find is it had exactly the same symptoms as COVID: heart illnesses, blood clots. When the heck did a vaping thing give you blood clots and the exact same things as a respiratory illness? Isn't that interesting, right? So we got inside of a month, we got these things. Now, here's something that most people don't know about. So within another month, something happens in September 19th of 2019. So all this was July and August. 1 month later, executive order on modernizing influenza vaccines in the United States to promote national security and public health. Donald Trump then begins Operation Warp Speed. This is September. He then, right after all of this happened, if you look up this executive order, if you do a search for the word pandemic, you'll find the word pandemic 18 times. If you read this executive order, it is very specifically the beginning of a pandemic response. They even use the word pandemic response. But who gets assigned to lead this pandemic response that starts in September? Is it the CDC? Is it the National Institute of Health? No. Anybody can read it for themselves. Go in there and look it up. The executive order on monetizing influenza vaccines in the United States. They assign the Department of Defense to lead it. The same Department of Defense that's in charge of Fort Detrick. Okay, now this is looking weird. Let's go 1 month later. Event 201, right? Okay, so this is 1 month after Donald Trump signs this. The Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise on October 18th in New York, New York. Let me read from, anyone can look up Event 201 and find a lot of documents. I will read one paragraph from this document. You can watch the videos, you can watch everything. Now, keep in mind, this is after Donald Trump begins a pandemic response, but there's no pandemic yet. Let me read the Event 201 scenario from the document that anybody can read right now. Event 201 simulates an outbreak of a novel zoonotic coronavirus transmitted from bats to pigs to people that eventually becomes efficiently transmission from person to person, leading to a severe pandemic. The pathogen and the disease it causes are modeled largely on SARS, but it is more transmissible in the community setting by people with mild symptoms. They just described COVID. So then we are to believe that about 2.5 weeks later in Wuhan, in a wet market, people eating bats started this. Well, here's my question. Why? There's one more thing I got to add. So we had this mysterious vaping disease, right? Find something else about it after COVID started. Mysteriously, just as mysterious as this vaping disease started after Fort Detrick shut down, it ended when COVID started. So my argument was, as a former investigator, when you do the timeline and you say within a 16-week period, these things all happened, it's not coincidental. It makes it clear, in my opinion, that COVID actually came out of Fort Detrick. To me, it's glaringly obvious. Anyone can go to my Substack, Garland, Nixon, this December, whatever date it is, and watch it. And I do a rundown on it, and I give you the audio and the video of it. But it's so clear to me that we're looking at a Fort Detrick leak. And to me, that's why they would say Wuhan. That's why they would do that. They would say Wuhan because you think that you're solving the mystery like Shaggy and Scooby by finding out what happened in Wuhan. They're redirecting you from where it really happened, in my opinion, which is clearly Fort Detrick.
Well, I think it's like,
if I could just weigh in with the historical aspect. I don't know, Garland, how much you've looked at the history of Fort Detrick and if you know much about the Frank Olson case. But maybe you can. I mean, it would fit with historical pattern. Given maybe you know a lot about.
No, I don't know that. You can fill them. Why do you think it fits with the horse?
Okay, well, I have looked at that history. I did an article on Dr. Frank Olson, and I mean, Fort Detrick was set up by the FDR administration as the center for the American Germ Warfare Program. and they recruited Nazi scientists under the Operation Paperclip. And so they were cultivating disease pathogens as part of the biological warfare program. And now we have definitive evidence. There's a new book that I reviewed by Thomas Powell, whose father had investigated this back in the 50s. And they're actually CIA documents. The CIA unwittingly leaked some documents that confirmed that the U.S. Air Force and CIA unleashed germ warfare during the Korean War in the 1950s. So, I mean, they have a history. Fort Detrick was the center of the germ warfare program, and they were manufacturing diseases that they deployed in Korea as part of biological warfare. So, I mean, it didn't come out of nowhere. What you're describing, it didn't come out of nowhere. Fort Detrick has a pattern, and there's a known track record of them developing disease pathogens for biological warfare purposes. And Dr. Frank Olson, and people can look up his case, and there was a Netflix film about him that was very good, by Errol Morris, who's a well-known filmmaker, that spotlighted the efforts of his son, Eric Olson, to find out the truth about what happened to his father. And I've done an article. Listeners can consult my article at Covert Action Magazine. There's something rotten in Denmark. Because Dr. Frank Olson worked for the CIA as a biochemist. He worked directly under Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's Dr. Death, who oversaw the germ warfare, biological warfare program at Fort Detrick. And Frank Olson lived in Frederick, Maryland, right near the Fort Detrick facility. He worked there. He was working with Gottlieb in developing these disease pathogens, and he went to Korea several times and knew all about how they were deployed there. And then he started to very subtly and kind of cryptic messages to his wife exposed that he had developed misgivings about the unethical medical experiments that were going on at Fort Detrick, and many animals were killed. They were doing unethical testing on animals, and many animals were killed there. And some of these pathogens may have been tests and experiments done to the American public unwittingly. And then Olson was threatening to become a whistleblower, so he was murdered. The evidence now is clear that he was murdered by the CIA when they and his son excavated the body and hired a top forensic scientist to examine the body. The official story was that Olson was committed suicide, that he had ingested LSD, and that drove him over the edge. However, that was just a cover story, and the CIA actually admitted and paid the family some money and claimed that they had given them LSD, that there had been LSD at some CIA parties. So they took some responsibility for his suicide. But then when the body was excavated, it was clear that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. It was not from suicide, from jumping from the hotel window. And in fact, right away, the doorman recognized that it couldn't have been a suicide, because to break through the glass, he was staying in a tiny room, and it was impossible to break through the glass unless somebody took a baseball bat and shattered the glass to the window. He would have had to have run through the hotel and crash through the window, and nobody saw that. And then the roommate who was with the CIA was behaving very, very oddly. And the first call he made was not to the police, but to Sidney Gottlieb. And he was overheard saying, "He's gone." He didn't call the police. He called Sidney Gottlieb. So we know Olson was murdered because he was threatening to become a whistleblower. So I think people should be aware of that dark history as a prelude to what has gone on today. And when these kind of programs are allowed to metastasize, we get human catastrophe like the COVID-19. And that's why we need more oversight and scrutiny into these kind of activities. So go ahead, Gloria, if you had some.
I was just going to add a couple of things, but Jayme and I have gone through the CIA's assassination manual, and it has, and Jayme can confirm this, it has a chapter on how to, kill targets. And one of them is, you hit them on the head, blunt force trauma, and then you throw them out a window. So, yeah. We know what to look for.
And make it look like a suicide. Yeah, and that manual, yeah. The Olson killing was the exact model for that manual. And Hank Albarelli wrote a book, There's a Terrible Mistake. He identified the CIA assassins. They were these Belgian killers. One was named Moses Moscovici, and he's actually a suspect in the Martin Luther King killing as well.
And then, the other thing I just wanted to add, when I had done my research back in 2020 at the origins, because, I found it really, the whole bat soup thing, was really a hard one to swallow, right, Garland? It's like, come on, there's bat soup at a wet market, and that's what's happening to everyone. So, based on the CIA's pattern of plausible deniability, which is, really its operational kind of guide, right away, I was like, well, if they discover that the code to the pathogen was manipulated, they're going to need something to blame it on. So, of course, having a bioweapon lab, in Wuhan was a perfect story, and then they could blame the Chinese. And at that time, there was already a lot of disparaging things being said by the Trump administration in particular about the Chinese. So this was kind of like a way to, really screw with the Chinese, in my opinion, and also to hide the hand, which is the U.S. origins that, I definitely am with Garland and Jayme, that the chances that it was made in either Fort Detrick or Chapel Hill with Ralph Baric, or, someplace is very high, because multiple places were conducting this particular research. And so a few things that were interesting, and I think we could just, touch upon it, is this massive jump that allegedly it started in Wuhan, and the next thing you knew, it was in Iran, and it was in Italy. And these are huge geographic leaps. It's very hard to believe that, this bat soup was able to, cross these borders. So it led a lot of us to believe that this might have been aerosolized and distributed by drones. And that theory still isn't really mainstream yet, but a lot of people do discuss it privately. And there's been a lot of bioweapon tests that have happened throughout the years in New York City subways, where they release things that are not considered dangerous pathogens, and they track it through the subway system, this aerosolized particles. And then also there was experiments done off the coast of, I don't know, Jayme, if you recall the details, or Garland. There was a ship stationed outside in the harbor in San Francisco, and they released pathogens. And again, they said that these were not dangerous, to track the flow, and they just released it all into San Francisco, and actually a lot of people did get ill. And so there is a history also of tests being done with aerosolized particles, and a lot of people who are study this stuff were saying, well, why a virus like like a flu virus and not something like Ebola? And the thing is, if you do something like Ebola, it cancels itself out very quickly because the hosts die. Whereas with a flu, you can really spread it because people are alive and spreading it, in addition to whatever kind of aerosolized things that are going on too. Thank you.
Well, and let me add this for the purpose of my investigation, I didn't get into motivation. I didn't get into whether it was deliberately released or whether it was, accidentally released, because for the purposes of my investigation, I just wanted to be very sterile about that, like, okay, let's focus on where it came from. So I didn't even look into any of that kind of stuff. What I looked into was this. Number one, let me just say this, as a person who, again, I ran a law enforcement, the better part of an agency. I understand how it works and understand public relations. If I wanted to, if you put me in charge of this thing and said, Garland, let's just say for the sake of purpose, let's just for the sake of this particular intellectual exercise right here, this specific one, let's say it leaked out of Fort Detrick. And I'm like, and they came to me and they said, Garland, it leaked out of Fort Detrick. What do you want to do? And I'd say, we got to give people something easy to solve so they'll figure they solved the puzzle, right? So here's what we do. We put it out of Wuhan and we give them a ridiculous premise, right? A ridiculous premise, a bat in a wet market. So what's going to happen? People are going to look at that and they say, who'd believe that? That's stupid. It had to be the Wuhan virus. So what have I just done? It had to be the viral lab. 11 miles away from the viral lab, here's a stupid and easily transparent premise that an idiot can figure out, right? So what happens? You now say, ha ha, I outsmarted the intelligence community. They thought they could give me that story that it was a wet market, when really I did my sleuthing and I figured out that it was really the Wuhan Institute. Well, that was my plan. I wanted to point the finger to the Wuhan Institute, and I knew I'd give you an easily solvable crime, and you would sleuth it out. And then the people in Wuhan would say we would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids and their stupid dog, right? Okay, so my opinion is this. They made a stupid, ridiculous, absurd argument in the first place, knowing that we would all solve it, and then we would believe it was Wuhan. Let me add this. I'm going to read something from an article real quick. The ASEAN Post. This was in Asia. And what was going on at the time, this was during COVID, a bunch of Asian intellectuals were saying to the World Health Organization, whoa, 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 Filipino, etc. If you're going to do an investigation, you got to look at, they were bringing up what I brought up. What about Fort Detrick? And for some reason, the World Health Organization was willing to look anywhere except Fort Detrick. And they kept saying that. And here's something that is in that article. They say, you got to look into it. And then they say, now keep in mind something also. October 13th through the 18th of 2019, right? Which incidentally is the same weekend that the Event 201 was going on. And 2 weeks supposedly before COVID started in Wuhan at a wet market, right? Listen to this. There was an incident, something called the World Military Games. It was held in Wuhan, China, and military people from all over the world came to Wuhan, China, and did these World Military Games, including the United States, and left. I think it's quite possible that the United States sent it over there. Either we can argue that it was on purpose or we can argue that it was an accident. But let me read from this ASEAN article. The diagnosis of U.S. Army athletes who were taken ill during the World Military Games held in Wuhan, China from 13 to 18 October 2019 must be declassified, especially because the wife of a Fort Detrick employee reportedly collapsed in the middle of a cycling event. Intriguingly, the Times of Israel reported in April 2020 that the U.S. alerted Israel NATO to disease outbreak in China in November 2019. So how did the U.S. know, right? So isn't that interesting? Just as many of us suspected, we're like, well, wait a minute. There was a World Military Games in Wuhan, China, in 2 weeks, supposedly, before case 0 goes up. Now, what else would that explain? If you want it to pop up all over the place, right? What do you do? Because you're like, well, we can't have it show up like it came out of Fort Detrick. Let me just use the argument that it leaked accidentally from Fort Detrick for a minute. It's out. And you're like, well, how are we going to point the finger away from Fort Detrick? I know, We send it to Wuhan because the World Military Games are there. And then there'll be soldiers from all over the place. They'll take it back to their respective countries. It'll pop up all over the place. And then we'll say, well, it certainly must have been Wuhan. That's where it started from. You send it to Wuhan, it goes everywhere. And as they said, the wife of a person who worked at Fort Detrick was a person that got sick. And apparently there were a number of U.S. Army athletes who took ill, and they were calling for the declassification of these Army athletes. So there is certainly also evidence pointing to it being sent to or somehow getting to Wuhan 2 weeks before patient 0 allegedly showed up. But on the same weekend that they were doing a tabletop drill for a novel coronavirus pandemic that they had no idea was going to start 2 weeks later.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people look forward, when they're doing investigations is who benefits. What is the motive? And what do you think about, Garland, about certain sectors in the U.S. economy and certain individuals that benefited very heavily from this?
Well, there's two ways to look at it, too. And there's always two ways to look at it with these things. So you can say, number one, they did it on purpose, and therefore there's lots of places we can go. They can get people under control, and they can have everybody get an app, and it's a way to mass control. I like to do too. As an investigator, I don't like to lock in on one and pretend that the other doesn't exist. As an investigator, you have to leave all things open, right? As an investigator, this is one thing you have to understand about the people in power. It doesn't really matter sometimes in a way for this reason. If there is a major event like this, some kind of a gigantic hurricane, an asteroid hits, a whatever, a pandemic, right? If it's organic and they did it on purpose, they'll figure out how to maximize their interest, right? If it's organic and they did it on purpose, then they will figure a way to maximize their interest. So yes, I guess it matters in a way whether or not how diabolical and evil they are, whether or not they did it on purpose. But the fact of the matter is, either way, whether it was organic, that it accidentally leaked, or they intentionally leaked, either way, they then set into action to maximize their interest. Oh, this is the perfect opportunity to do this. So to me, as an investigator, I don't really know. But I say this, either way, it doesn't matter, because they would then take the opportunity to maximize their interest. And we could easily see what happened then, because so many other things didn't make sense. How do you literally say, look, we're going to close down this mom and pop store that sells sporting goods on the corner where 10 people come in a day? Why? To keep you safe, because we don't want people gathering. What are you going to do? We're going to keep Walmart and Costco open where 1,000 people come in. Those things don't align, except for the interests of Costco are much better, or, not just Walmart, are much better interests, represented. So the guy who only has a few bucks and is barely trying to make ends meet, he can't have his store open for 10 people a day. But the one that has 10,000 a day can. That doesn't stop the spread. You should do it the other way around. So either way, on purpose or not, they were able to effectively use that to maximize the interest of the wealthy and to wipe out small businesses across the globe.
Now, I got a couple questions. Well, first, there is a lot of question marks about COVID as a disease. There are some actually who are in the camp, because I had this discussion with Michelle Chosudovsky, who the head of global research, and he wrote a book about a COVID and a coup d'etat of the elites, and he actually believes that there is no such thing as COVID. Because I was discussing some of these theories of COVID origin and the CIA's potential involvement, and he kind of stopped me, and he doesn't believe that COVID actually exists, that a lot of those people who claim they died from COVID had the flu or some other disease. They died from something else. They were already very sick people or elderly people, and they just, inflated the statistics, using people who may have got the flu, or they said tested with COVID but died from other causes. And so my question, how do you weigh in on this? What is your sense about COVID? I mean, a lot of others say that there was a lot of alarmism about COVID, that maybe it's real, but that it is more like a flu variant, and it's, it didn't cause all these deaths. That was used to create this climate of fear to advance this elite agenda of isolating people and benefiting certain companies and pushing a more authoritarian model of government.
My opinion is yes, but now this is my opinion. Yes, COVID did exist, and I do believe that it was in fact a bioweapon, and there's a history of bioweapons, and there are a lot of evidence, overwhelming evidence pointing to it being existing. I do believe this, though. What COVID was, from my perspective, is a type of a flu on steroids. It was a flu on steroids. So wherein a normal flu will kill people who are weaker. We know that it'll kill young people who's a certain percentage of very young people whose immune systems haven't developed, and older people whose immune systems are weak, and the people in between who do the illnesses. A regular flu will do that, right? Let's say a regular flu is a level 2 on what people it'll kill. Then COVID would be a level 5 or 6. So what you have is you have something that is effectively a flu on steroids, so it'll kill people at a higher volume, people who aren't as weak, right? People where a normal flu kills somebody who's very, very weak. This will kill somebody who's just very weak, not two varies, if you understand what I'm saying. This is my opinion on COVID. But COVID has a lot of other nasty things to it, I think, due to the spike protein. I think there's a lot of other illnesses, diseases, and things such as heart conditions and turbo cancers and other things that we're seeing that have been caused specifically by COVID, that it was a nasty bioweapon. And I think it was real. And I just think it was, but I do think this. Let me say one other thing. And I could point to articles in the Washington Post, which I could dig up and find again, actually, but where they had doctors that admitted that up to 90, in some of their hospitals that they worked in, it was in the Washington Post, up to 90% of the people that they posted, that they officially wrote down as dying from COVID, died with COVID. In other words, what they do, you come in, you got a gunshot wound, you got a car accident, they test you. And if you test positive for COVID and you die, they call it a COVID death. As you know, they were getting money from the government for every COVID death and things of that nature. And then, because people ask a question, and that is, why in the heck is it that we're having way more COVID deaths than some of these other countries that really don't, aren't doing anything? And some countries, no masks. I know people with Africa, South America, nobody's dying. And what are you talking about? And not with the numbers that we're getting. People are dying, certainly, but not with the numbers. Why is that? And now part of the argument was, well, people in the U.S. are sick, and people in the U.S., we eat less healthy and we're a lot healthier. I believe that may be true. I'm not going to say it's not true. But when you got doctors saying that 90% of the people that we marked as dying of COVID didn't really die of COVID, that they died of something else, and that anybody, I've also saw it from health officials from Illinois and other places that admitted, well, when somebody comes in and they got another injury, we say it's COVID. The same way when they said that the hospitals were overflowing, what they did was that people came into the ICU from a car accident. If they tested positive for COVID, they said they're in the ICU for COVID. That way they could say the hospitals are bursting at the seams with COVID victims, when in fact, anybody who came in that they could test positive is now a COVID victim. So what I'm saying is, I think our numbers were intentionally inflated, and that probably far less than half of the number of actual deaths that we had were as a result of COVID, but there were people who had COVID. And as I said, this isn't a crazy conspiracy theory. This was in the Washington Post. This was in other places where doctors that were named, hospitals that were named, admitted that, and other health officials have admitted that.
One of my favorite jokes at the time, and these are very dark jokes, of course, a meth lab exploded and 5 people died of COVID.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, it's really pretty outrageous stuff out there. I have to do a little thing here. You're listening to Left on Left on WBAI 99.5 FM and on the Progressive Radio Network. Okay. Back to you guys.
Okay. I can recommend Gary Knoll has an excellent documentary about what you're describing, Garland, and it's very this documentary has a lot of research that went into it and a lot of good people, including many doctors, saying the kind of thing that you're describing.
Um,
Yeah.
one thing, Jeremy, just to the point that you made about Michael, and is that one of the arguments people who are of it doesn't exist viewpoint is the size of a virus, that they're really invisible and you can't see a virus. So that's one of the arguments that people in that particular camp that it doesn't exist will use. It's personally, it's not my opinion, but I have heard that from others also. Thanks.
Yeah, and as I said, I don't, I don't, subscribe to that theory. I do believe it did exist, and I do believe I do believe that it was a bioweapon, and certainly the evidence is powerful that it came from Fort Detrick and that eventually it was transferred up to Wuhan. And I'll put it like this: whether or not it was intentionally released at Fort Detrick, we still can make this argument, and that is, it certainly appears that maybe it was at least intentionally sent to Wuhan. You know what I mean? I mean, come on. This thing's floating around here. You're setting up, as an example. So they do this event 201 in October, which was very specifically a tabletop exercise for a zoonotic novel coronavirus. That was the words. It took them like a month to set this thing up, which means they started setting it up exactly on the date that Donald Trump did his beginning of Operation Warp Speed executive order, right? But any way you look at it, it certainly appears they sent it up there. And it makes sense, because if it's me and I'm like, oh my God, we're going to get caught, everybody's going to figure us out, what are we going to do? Well, I mean, if I were evil like this, well, I got an idea. We got this thing going on in Wuhan. Let's just send it up there. It'll disseminate from Wuhan. We can point the finger at Wuhan. We'll come up with some cockamamie story that nobody in their right mind would believe. And everybody will think they were a brilliant sleuth and they solved it. See, I want you to know that it's a bullcrap story. I'm going to give you the most hokey story of all times. It was a bat in a wet market, because you will then think that you were the great sleuth, and you'll say, man, I outsmarted the government. I figured out that the stupidest story in the history of the world was a fake. It was a fake story, and it was designed to be a fake story, and it was designed for you to figure it out.
Well, I got another one. How about 9/11? I mean, I think I wrote in the article that, we're not really sure what happened, but, it's so unplausible that any other explanation besides bat soup would make sense. The same way we really don't know what happened with 9/11, but the main story is very hard to believe.
Well, I remember when the Nord Stream pipeline blew up, and I had a meme that I was putting out, and it was like a picture of Vladimir Putin's passport floating near the scene of the explosion. Because let's face it, if a plane crashes into a building and it's like 2,000 degrees of temperature of an explosion, the only thing that would make it would be a passport. I'm telling you right now, why didn't they make the whole plane out of whatever they made that passport out of, and then the people would have survived?
Well, the other thing you brought out, Garland, that, okay, so there was no more deaths from vaping after COVID came out. Okay, all the deaths of vaping just went away. The other thing that went away was all flu. There was no incidence of flu the minute COVID hit. And there's another joke out there, that's another dark joke. It says, what cured COVID? And they say Putin, because
right.
All of a sudden we shifted right into Ukraine and Russia and World War III, and then nobody was talking about COVID anymore. So that's another joke, that Putin cured COVID.
One of the things, let me see, vaping illness. The other thing people should do is look up what the vaping illness symptoms, right? And what they told us was that what vaping illness was, what they ended up saying is, we figured it out. And that is, some people making vapes for weed had used vitamin E oil instead of some other kind of oil. And so when you vaped it, it would coat your lungs, and then you would die, right? Okay. But what was interesting is it like popped up in Virginia, it popped up in New York, it popped up in. So what the heck did these people like make? Canada. It like popped up all over the place. So wouldn't you think that if somebody did this with vitamin E oil, that it would have to be all? They would like have one batch of them. How the heck did it pop up all over the place? But this vaping illness. Let's look at the at some of the symptoms. Fever. So vitamin E oil gives you fever, chills, cough, chest tightness, belly pain, nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, weight loss, right? Some people say their symptoms formed over a few days, while others say it took several weeks. Those affected seem to have serious lung damage. They may need intensive care and support with a ventilator. So when you look at that, you're like, so lung disease could take, I got, my lungs are coated with vitamin E, but that could take a few weeks to happen. And when you read more, it's like blood clots. And I'm like, how the hell do you get a fever and chills from having your lungs coated with vitamin E oil? That is very specifically the symptoms of a respiratory virus. So they give you the symptoms of a respiratory virus, but then they tell you, yeah, you've got vitamin E coating all over your lungs. It's absurd.
The causation and the correlation was also kind of a stretch. They asked people if they had vaped within 1 to 2 weeks. It's not like, we're saying, oh, this is a person who's habitually vaping and they have a, daily habit and, they're going through cartridge after cartridge. This is, have you vaped in 1 to 2 weeks from the onset of your symptoms, which is, very, very thin. Have you gone through a red light within 1 to 2 weeks of your symptoms? You could really, stretch out causality with anything. Have you used the bathroom in 1 to 2 weeks before you had your symptoms? So it's thin at best.
Oh, absolutely. It is just, and we don't have any data. Why don't we get any data on this stuff? Why don't we get every single person? In fact, again, the Chinese, and let me just say this, I've got a couple of, if people go, and here's why I would recommend my Substack is called Political Superfood, and it's called COVID Origins, Fort Detrick, and the Mysterious Vaping Disease, right? And it was, why was the government prepping for a pandemic months before the pandemic began? But I included the links and this is important for people who are curious, I included the links that I used. And at the bottom of the links, you'll find a couple of links where the Chinese said they suspected that this came from Fort Detrick, and they also brought up the vaping disease, and they talked about that the vaping disease. It was so clear that something was weird here about this vaping disease. And when's the last time you heard the vaping disease? When COVID started, it just went away. They just stopped talking about it completely.
Who cured it? The vaping disease.
Exactly. So I think the evidence is strong, and there are a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? There are a lot of theories about why, or was it deliberately, or was it not deliberately released? Was it real? Was it not real? But I think the evidence, if anybody looks at that, is overwhelming, convincing evidence that something came. I'll put it like this. Let me put it a different way. Here's one thing we absolutely know beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty. On September 19th of 2019, the United States government began preparation for a pandemic response. And the reason we know that is because in the September 19th executive order, it says that they were preparing for a pandemic response. I think that's pretty much straightforward, that they began doing that. But how can we possibly square that with November 6th was patient 0, but they started September 19th? Those two things don't come together.
Mm-hmm. And what role do you think the CIA, we know that Avril Haines, the former director of national intelligence, was involved with these planning conferences. What is your sense of the role of the CIA in all this?
Well, I think something else is important here, and that people need to look at that event 201. The videos are still up where they had this tabletop conference before patient zero showed up on how they would respond to a novel coronavirus pandemic. Okay. They talked about how they would deal on social. I put it like this. If you look at it, this is what they did. They were like, well, how will we deal with misinformation on it? How will we deal with on social media? How will we censor what goes out on the media? If you read it, it's the exact plan. That's the other thing. This is 2 weeks supposedly before the virus appeared. If you watch that, you're like, well, my God, everything they're talking about is exactly what they did. They had like fake newscasts that they were using and all this kind of stuff. So to me, and who was Avril Haines? She became the director of national intelligence under Joe Biden. So the person who chaired the tabletop exercise for a novel coronavirus pandemic tabletop exercise before there was a novel coronavirus pandemic, the person who chaired that became the director of national intelligence. Oh, by the way, the CIA, NSA, every single intelligence agency answers to the director of national intelligence. So I think it's pretty clear that that was set forward. And then in comes Avril Haines. And then what happens then? All of these really draconian censorship things happen. All of these draconian, the mandates that you have to take the jab or you'll lose your job and you can't travel. All of those things happen. I don't think those are accidents. So the tie is they took the person who ran this tabletop exercise and put that person in charge of all of our intelligence agencies.
What do you think of predictive programming? A lot of people talk about that. Hollywood with the movie Contagion and a lot of the techniques that were kind of programmed into us to accept it, stop the spread, containment, all of these things. Then all of a sudden when you roll out a program, people are like, oh yeah, that's reasonable because I saw that a couple of years ago in the theater.
Well, I think here's what I think, and that is that, Jayme could tell you far better than me, but Hollywood is a longtime part of the intelligence operations. And here's what I think. And if you look into it, you'll find out. There was, I believe, 2014, 15, somewhere 13, there was a Ebola epidemic in Africa. If you remember, they were all talking about that, and the people in Africa immediately said it came from that lab over there where they work on Ebola. And people were like, those stupid Africans, they don't, how can, just because there's an Ebola lab here and Ebola pops up, the exact kind that Sam Husseini did good work on that. If you look at SARS, so basically there's a book I have right here called Bitten. Bitten is a book that is about the strong evidence that Lyme disease came out from a government experiment. So here's what I think. They were so busy working on all these nasty bugs. I think they knew that some of them had already gotten out. There was a record in history of some of them getting out and death. I think they knew it was a matter of time. And I think a lot of these types of movies were kind of a preparation for like, man, we know it's just a matter of time before one of these superbugs gets out and starts doing its dirt. And we got to have people mentally prepared and ready just in case, we get a zombie apocalypse or something. A lot of those zombie apocalypse movies, the same kind of thing. Some truck is riding along with the government, it flips over, gas comes out, and everybody starts wandering around moaning and eating each other. I think a lot of this stuff is preparation for just in case it happens. Everybody will be like, oh yeah, I saw that in the movie. Right, what do we do now? Run. Duck and cover under your desk. Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah,
well, that's what they tell us for nuclear war. They told us in New York, don't worry, you've got this, New Yorkers. Just go under your desk and duck and run.
Yeah. Jayme, were you saying something?
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I think they kind of condition people that's that's something that's kind of within the realm of plausibility. And yeah. I did an article on the CIA in Hollywood, and I think in the 70s, there were a few negative films about the CIA. So they set up a Hollywood liaison in the CIA to basically oversee Hollywood films and to, I mean, it had a budget, I think, for financing a lot of films. And you would think, they were filmed that kind of presented the CIA heroically in various, overseas operations. But I think it's not a stretch to believe that they would finance these kind of films as well to, as you say, to condition people to accept this as something that's plausible.
There's a movie I would recommend, a documentary to people called Theaters of War, how the Pentagon and CIA took Hollywood. And in fact, people follow my YouTube show. I mean, Garland, Nixon. I'm going to have one of the directors of that movie, one of the people that put that together on next week to talk about that. And I think it's something that people really need to know and understand, that these things are related, that they're, a lot of this stuff is set up. Hey, this could happen. Great. Let's do a movie about it.
And one question. I mean, I think the left seems to be programmed, to oppose overseas military interventions, but and to see through the propaganda. But when it comes to the disease pandemics, they seem to fall in line just as much, even more so than non-anti-war, just regular people. And most of the opposition to the COVID mandates and most of the people who are critical were on the right, and the left were the most authoritarian, as we've all experienced. So I don't know. How do you explain that?
Yeah, how about this? A recent Jurassic Park movie featured a diverse group of young CIA agents who infiltrated an evil corporation on behalf of the CIA so they could stop this evil corporation from poisoning the world's food supply. That's the opposite of what the CIA does.
Yeah.
So you talk about propaganda, a young, diverse group, a male, a female, a non-gendered person, you know what I mean, a black person, a Muslim, it's always a diverse group of young, good-looking people are on behalf of the CIA are doing good in the world. Oh, isn't that highly believable?
Mm-hmm. What's the
Talk
name
about
of the movie? That's a new movie.
That was the one of the Jurassic Park movies. I think it was Dominion or something like that, where some guy had locusts that was going to eat the world's food supply or something in this evil evil corporation. And the CIA infiltrated the corporation to stop the corporation from doing evil. Yeah. We're really supposed to believe that. Talk about,
when really
reversing
the CIA,
reality.
The historical pattern is that the CIA, because Olson was a CIA biochemist, and it was the CIA that manufactured biological weapons. So it's the precise opposite of what that film portrays, which is usually the case. And most of the public, kind of eats this stuff up. I mean, they've been very effective in rebranding their image. And that's what I was saying. Even people on the left who fashion themselves as very sophisticated and seeing through government propaganda just kind of fell into line with the COVID. And it brought out some really ugly traits among these people, McCarthy type behavior, and they're still at it, smearing. I mean, we've had open discussions of Robert Kennedy on this show, and there may be good and bad things about him, but the discourse you get on the left is just entirely negative, smearing, not really engaging in any of his books or ideas. So it's really a very ugly tendency that in part is the reason we developed this show. Because we were horrified. We have a background as anti-war activists and we're involved in leftist circles, and we're just horrified at how they excommunicated people and behaved in this authoritarian way. And a lot of that centered on the COVID narrative that they still cling to, even though many of the shibboleths have been discredited, whether it's the vaccine, whether it's the COVID origin. Because the bat story was totally discredited. But many still believe it and are hostile if you raise the kind of points. And there are a lot of censorship in alternative media, which is the focus of our show, looking at programs like Democracy Now! And others and how they censor these topics and continue to promote censorship, even when it's out in the open, certain things.
Well, we refer to these people, I'm sure you do too, Garland, as the lockdown left. It's
Oh, yeah.
it's incredible. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, the thing that I found alarming was, not that they had a position that I disagree with. That's fine. In fact, I argue for robust discussions and let's sit down and disagree. The problem I had was this: the government made policies. And people had a right to question the government policies, to oppose the government policies, and then to have a vibrant debate about. That's what it was. It wasn't about really COVID. It was when the government said we should do this or that. There are skeptical people amongst us who say, "Look, okay, fair enough. The government said that. We'd like to see what that's based on. 6 feet apart. Fair enough. 6 feet apart doesn't sound unfair, but where's the science that that's based on?" And basically they said, if you do not arbitrarily accept what the government tells you, accept their policies, if you question the policies, you're attacking science. And we argued, well, wait a minute. The science is a process that is founded in skepticism. So we give us the evidence, and we were told you don't have a right to do that. What did we get? The CIA created mantra of you're a conspiracy theorist, and all people were saying was, it's not wrong to tell us for the government to have a policy. It's wrong for the citizens not to be able to question the policy and have a robust debate. And I think that's one of the things that was going on also, and that was, let's kill people's ability to debate government policies. Let's attack those, and let's create an environment where people who question government policies will now be ostracized. They'll be thrown out, and they'll be defined as kooks and crackpots, which is very valuable, because what happens? Next thing you know, we get the whole Ukraine conflict. And again, people were like, well, there's a historical context. So let's look. Oh, no, you're the COVID crackpots. Now you're questioning our war. Your people are insane. You've got to be dealt with.
Well, one of the things that Jayme and I talk about a lot on our show is, how healthy it is for debate, because it encourages, students, it encourages everyone to look at both sides and to really think for themselves. Everyone should really, do their own analysis and ask their own questions and really demand answers that make sense to them. So, with our show and yours too, we're about providing information. We're not about telling people what they should believe. We're just offering alternate viewpoints so that people can actually think, and that develops the brain. And, as kids growing up, I think, you probably remember too, there were debate clubs back in the day. And, we were encouraged to argue both sides and to really understand an issue holistically. And with these, forced narratives, it really, I think, weakens the intellectual dexterity of students and, developing brains to only accept one narrative and to reject everything else, that it's unpleasant, that you can only, perceive things in one way. And if you, debate or criticize, then somehow that's a negative thing, and it shouldn't be done.
And also, yeah, this anti-intellectualism, because you would, press them with information and they just shut you down. They say, oh, you're anti-science. They don't actually do the background reading or research. And more is coming out now to validate the viewpoint of the skeptics. But these people just kind of double down. They're very stubborn, egotistical.
We got the wrap it up from Jayme. I just want to give Garrett time to just
Garland the last word.
Yeah, please tell us a little bit about how our audience can find you.
Great, sure. You can find me on Telegram at GarlandN. You can find me on Facebook, Garland Nixon, Instagram, Garland.Nixon, and email me. I answer emails. It's GarlandN. That's my first name and my first letter of my last name at gmail.com. And of course, every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m., WPFW 89.3 FM, your Pacifica affiliate in Washington, D.C., Eastern Standard Time.
Thank you
so much. And that's
GarlandN,
GarlandN at Gmail.
Is that with two INN?
No, it's my first name, and the first letter of my last name. Garland, and then the letter N at Gmail.
Great. Well, that wraps up our show for today. This is Left on Left. I'm Gloria Guillot, joined here today by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like, donate, and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.
Hey, that was great. That was excellent.
So fun.
It was.
There we
really
go.
was.
That's how we do it.
Yeah, that was good. So that's going to be on BAI. Wow, I was on Randy Credit Codes. I'm getting on BAI more often these days, which is great.
Yeah,
I was
Randy's a good guy.
Yeah, I was so banned for the last couple of years over this Russia stuff. From COVID, I couldn't get on hardly anywhere. Then the Russia-Ukraine war stuff, and I've been on the road. I've been on the right side of history and the wrong side of neoliberalism for a long time.
That's how I feel. Yeah, that's exactly. Maybe one day somebody will appreciate.
Well, it does feel like YouTube has been lightening up here in the last couple months.
Not on me.
A little bit. I mean, because the stuff we were talking about today would have been shut down pretty much.
Yeah. No, my analytics, man, they're killing me. I looked literally. I was telling people I always actually do my analytics. Is the way I think. And at one point, I was at for every 318 views.
Well, guys, I have to run because I've got.
See you later, Jayme.
Garland, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, sounds good. 10
Oh, yeah,
a.m.
wait, announce that, guys. Jeremy announced in Garland that you're going to be on his show tomorrow. What time?
Okay. So tomorrow morning at Friday morning at 10 a.m., Jayme Kuzmarov will be on, and we talk all things covert action, CIA, intel, all that stuff. Oh, that's a great show. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'm actually clipping that for Jeremy, so he has clips from being on your show.
Wonderful.
And
thank you very much.
I sent you one 2 weeks ago if you want to throw it up on
Yes.
Yeah, it's in your email.
Right. I forgot about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, look for a pasta to go, and I'll send you another one from his next appearance too.
Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Jayme. See you guys.
Thanks,
All right.
Jeremy. Bye-bye.
All right.
We're still live. But
we are?
We have wrapped up the recording for WBAI. So I don't have anywhere to go, so I can stick around as long as you guys want to.
I'm gonna go to the hospital and visit Dad, so I'm going to bow out.
All right, same here. I got plenty to do, but I certainly appreciate it, gang.
Jayme calls this part how we make the sausage.
Well, that's what this show is. You get to watch us and see how we actually do the job for what is going on the radio. Since we're not doing it live radio, we're just doing recorded. So.
Well, if Jayme, if you want to stay a few more minutes, if you had a few questions or something, I can stick around another 15 or 20 minutes if you want.
Oh, I mean, I'm good on this subject.
Okay.
It's like, I could chat with you on a sec.
Sure, whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to. Whatever. If you got something, I got. It's 12:20. I got till 12:30. If you want to keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a quick question here.
Sure.
Are you familiar with John Cullen's work on when he was looking into COVID?
No.
So he has a theory, and I mean, I like it. I think it's plausible that COVID is actually it's a cover for something else that was actually out there and that was actually killing people. And he thinks it might have been a variant of a weaponized variant of the bird flu. What do you think about that as a possibility for what this could be in terms of what COVID was really about? Is that a possible idea where they use COVID, which is a real thing, but not that deadly, to cover up for something else that got leaked from Fort Detrick that was very deadly, but so they use COVID as a cover for that?
Well, what's interesting is this. It's interesting you say that because you've got COVID and you've got the whole issue of, okay, there's a pandemic and we got to respond to a pandemic. And that can then be used for all other kind of diabolical means, right? So I don't know. I mean, anything's plausible. I don't know about that, but there's an angle, since you mentioned what COVID can be used for, there's another angle. And there was an Italian economist. And basically what he said was this, and whether or not it was leaked or not leaked or whatever, what he said was this: during COVID, one of the things that happened was, and if you remember, starting in October, everybody started saying the market's crashing and there's all these signs that the market is completely, absolutely crashing, right? And he said, what happened was this: everything was about to get wiped out economically and they needed to do something, right? And what they did was, when they did that CARES Act, and everybody was like, wait a minute, you did the CARES Act, but you just gave away like $7 trillion to all these corporations. What the heck does that have to do with COVID, right? What this guy argued was, look, everything's about to crash. And they gave all of these money to all these corporations to keep them liquid. It was like a big buyout, right? He said, but if they just took this money and threw $7 trillion in overnight, it would, and we'd get hyperinflation and everything would still fall to pieces, right? He said, so what you needed to do was, what did you need to do? You need to shut down the economy. You needed to lock down everybody. You needed to stop the world economy as much as you could so that you could then put 7, 8 trillion, I've heard up to $10 trillion into the hands of these corporations. If it just started floating around the economy, you're going to have immediate hyperinflation and things are going to fall apart. What they were able to do is shut the economy down, throw $7 trillion in, and you could let things say, okay, let's let things simmer for a while. You know what I mean? And now what do? You turn like one ship sideways in the Suez Canal. And then you say, hey, oh my gosh, we've got inflation, because the inflation now starts to leak. When you shut it down, you don't get immediate hyperinflation, but when you open back up, it's going to start to leak and you're going to get inflation. And that as a result of that, that's why there's been rising inflation, but they were able to shut things down, throw the money in, and postpone, instead of hyperinflation, a slow leak of inflation, and we were going to suffer. And that's one of the things that we're suffering from. And I mean, if you think about it, remember that when you turn a single ship sideways, and when I saw pictures of it, right, it was like, it really wasn't blocking things that much.
No, it was
and
like,
you're like, a ship turned sideways in a friggin' Suez Canal. They won't even tell us what was on it. It was probably iron ore or something. You know what I mean? It probably wasn't. It's the Suez Canal. And now I can't buy like hats and shoes because a friggin' ship full of grain or something turned sideways in the Suez Canal. And the whole world now is a total supply chain is disrupted. It made as much sense as the bat soup in the wet market.
Right. It would, the Suez Canal blockage would make sense for blocking trade to Europe, but we still do most of our trade with China across the Pacific Ocean that doesn't go through the Suez Canal.
Let's go one better. The Houthis shut down the whole Red Sea for like 16 months, and we could still buy stuff. And the Suez Canal comes right from the Red Sea. So a ship turned sideways for 2 weeks obliterates the entire global supply chain. But as soon as the Red Sea shuts down, they're like, well, they're going to have to go around to Africa. It's going to take a bit longer, maybe use some trains, but we'll keep this thing going. So I do think there was an economic element. Again, whether it was intentional or accidental, there was an economic element there that we don't know about and may not for some time. And there's something fishy going on now. This whole Doge thing going through the Treasury and all that. There's a whole hell of a lot more to this. The richest man in the world. He is the point man. You got him. You got Zuckerberg. You got the Apple guy. You got Bezos. All of these people sitting side by side at the inauguration. And people think Trump's doing this? No.
Right.
These, in my opinion, Musk is the point man for these trillionaires. And they have decided that they're going to reorganize the monetary system. That's why he's got to get in. Look where he's getting in. He's getting into the Treasury. He's getting into social. He's getting into all. Why the hell is he getting into those? Why didn't he choose the Department of Interior first? Why didn't he choose Department of Health? And why? No, he's going into the monetary system. This ain't Trump. This is the billionaires who have said, we are changing the monetary system. That's what they're going to do.
They're using it to do things we wanted to do for a long time, like going after privatizing all the things that have been public services for so long that we depend on. And that never really goes well when they turn a public system into a private system. Yeah,
they're going to replace it all with AI, in my opinion. They're firing all these federal employees. They will replace them all with AI. And these poor fools that are like, yeah, they're getting rid of federal employees. Yeah, you're coming next, pal.
But they tell us about some of the good stuff. Like, I actually think the USAID part was actually good. So they led with a good story, and that was
excellent. Of course, that wasn't an accident.
It needed to be gutted. I was okay with that, but then they don't tell us about the other stuff that's really going on. That's going to be really bad for us. Right. So it's like that's a sugar cube in a painful, terrible tasting spoonful of medicine.
Exactly.
And I do think
They're
they
going
were
to they're going to AI. I think it's AI. I think they're going to get rid of all of
want
these
to.
people, and they're going to replace all these federal governments with AI. And the people that are cheering it on, you better stop cheering, because your job is next, and they're going to
Yeah.
replace you with AI. And then they'll be able to say, "Oh well, everybody's out of work. What do we do? Well, we'll give them
And
this app. We'll give everybody $2,000 a month of digital currency free with this app, because there's no jobs for you anymore, unless of course you say something bad on social media. Then you won't get your 2,000. You know, you won't
it
get
wouldn't
that
be all
money.
that bad. It wouldn't be all that bad if we weren't ruled by some of the worst people our society has to offer. So
Exactly.
their motivations are not really going to be something that's going to result in something that's good for the rest of us. Um, if we had a society that was structured differently, I don't think AI would be a problem, and I don't think people should worry about it. But one of the first things they're using AI for is to do artwork. We don't need AI. We don't need computers to do artwork. There's like millions of people who want to do artwork and can't. Like AI is supposed to do the jobs that people don't want to do, so they'd be freed up to do art. People want to do art. We don't need that. So it's mind-boggling to me. They're just taking away all the jobs because they'll have AI do it, but they don't have a plan to do anything with the people now that they don't have any work, to have any money to put back into the economy.
Well,
It's
think
just,
about this too.
I
They
don't know if
start off,
anybody's thinking of it at the big picture level at all.
yeah, they start off with it doing like artwork, and you can do AI memes, and you can do AI video. So like the average slump out here on YouTube, or who the average one of us out here, we use AI. We're like, AI is great. We can use it to do fun things. And they release it and they give it to us. And we learn to love AI, and we hug it, and it's convenient. And now we're all in support of AI, and then things turn ugly. Then you
I
get
know.
that pink slip. Oh, by the way, you're being replaced by AI. So first
How
they
many
give you the candy, and then they give
how
you
many
the
dystopian
manure.
movies have you watched where it's AI is coming out and it does all these horrible things, and when we watch it, we say, "Oh, that's terrible. Maybe we should not do that." But then these people in charge watch those movies and think, "Hey, that's a great idea. Let's do it."
Exactly.
We've had so many warnings just in my lifetime from science fiction and great writers to tell us, let's not go that route and do that thing. But
You make a
let's
strong point.
tie
Oh,
this
go ahead.
back up to COVID as a cover.
Sure.
There's one last thing you reminded me of. Do you remember there was that time early in the pandemic, early in the lockdowns, where they set up all those tent cities for like all the potential people they were gonna have to put in the hospitals, and there was gonna be overflow, and they had those all set up in different parts of the country, and they shut down all the air travel. I don't think that had anything to do with COVID, because if you recall, none of those facilities ever got used. They didn't put any COVID patients in them at all.
Well, there's the money laundering aspect too. And that goes back to, I remember when I was in law enforcement, I can tell you, when one of the things they did, a perfect example, one of the things that they did when they started militarizing the police, right? And I was running a significant part of the police department. They came to us and they said, "Hey, the government's going to pay for you guys getting these NBC suits, nuclear, biological, and chemical suits. Every officer gets one, and they get to store." And I said, "Nah, we don't need them." They said, "Why?" I said, "Number one, they're only good for 2 years. You got to throw them away. They're very expensive. And last but not least, our officers, that ain't what we do. If there's some like biological release, the firemen go into the quote red zone. Our police officers are in the green zone. We're outside telling people, hey, you can't go past this area," right? I said, "So we don't need them. It's a waste of money. We don't need these NBC suits." 2 months later, "Hey, Garland, where do you want us to put them? We're delivering truckloads of the NBC suits." They put them in a warehouse, like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth. 2 years later, they took them out of the warehouse and they threw them in the trash. What I found was this: there's a lot of money laundering going on. So when something like terrorism happens, right, all of these companies find a way to go to government officials and say, "Can I sell you this?" And the government officials who are corrupt and getting their kickback, they just start signing off on all of this stuff. So what happened? A lot of these states got millions and millions and billions of dollars from the federal government for COVID response, right? And so they got to spend the money. So now the state of Maryland says, "What are you going to do? We've got to build a fake hospital." So Senator so-and-so and House Representative so-and-so, whose brother-in-law just happens to own a corporation that can do this, signs up on all of these. Do you remember at the time, the governor of Maryland, his wife was from South Korea, and the United States found a way to buy like $500 million worth of some such COVID crap from South Korea. It was COVID tests. And when we got the COVID test, they found out that they were missing something that they needed to work. So they just ended up trashing them all and nobody talked about it. I may have the number wrong of 500 million, but that's an example, right?
Yeah,
that
I've heard of that story.
They had one of the things is that when they get something like this, it becomes a money laundering operation. And they can find, I can tell you, when the state of Maryland gets $500 million to spend on COVID, rest assured, they're going to spend all 500 million. They will find creative ways to do
they want to get it again next time. If you don't spend it, they don't get the money next time. That's just the way the government does things.
And they can spend it any way they want to. And so that's a big part of what was happening in COVID too. As money was handed out for COVID money, wherever it went, people were going to find a way to spend it. And so they just had to be creative and make up any kind of crap they could that they needed.
Yeah, and it's just, they're not letting a disaster go to waste is what.
It's a money making opportunity. COVID for a lot of people, once that money making opportunity, they didn't care how it started or whatever. They're like, hey, I'm here in Maryland. What do you got? Hey, we're going to get $100 million. Come over to our agency. What are you going to do with it? Oh, we'll find stuff to buy it. And if somebody's wife or husband just happens to work in a company that could, take that contract, well, the coincidences happen. People got to eat.
That's right. All right, Garland. I've kept you for an extra 15 minutes.
All right, brother.
Sticking around. I'd love talking to you. Hopefully we can do this again in the future. So everybody who's watching us, this is Left on Left, a presentation of Pasta to Go. Our executive producer is Craig Pasta Jardula, who will be back on this show eventually for making an appearance. And he's looking forward to talking to you as well. And he wants to interview you in the near future as well, just because he misses you.
So, oh man, I love Pasta. He's a great guy. Thank you.
He's great. He's great. So thanks for joining us on the show today. It has been a real pleasure. And everybody watching at home, I hope you had a good time. And if you're in New York, check it out on WBAI. And I'll be editing this episode. And it'll probably be up in the next couple of weeks. So thanks for everybody at home. Thank you, Garland. Thanks to Gloria and Jayme. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.